What's important gets rewarded. What's rewarded gets repeated. And so if it's important to you, are you measuring it?
What's obvious is you clearly know how to sell. What about building that first sales function in SurTech? What was that like? What did you struggle with?
Recognizing sales as a profession is a significant weakness in South Africa, and people tend to fall into it rather than choose it.
People try and take the advice of how to sell something like that and actually end up building the wrong thing, because we're going to copy the marketing product-driven approach towards sales. And it's like, actually, no, you need a sales-driven approach towards sales.
If you think your business isn't a sales business, then I really question what business you're in, because every business is a sales business first, second, and third.
What were some of the first kind of hurdles that you had to overcome to get other people to sell like you? Hello, and welcome back to the Founder Files. Today, I'm going to be talking to Phillip Tillman, who is the founder and CEO of SurTech Group of Companies and Konsise. So not only are we going to be talking about both of these companies and how they were started, but we speak about what Phil does best, and that's building out sales and building out sales teams. So I couldn't help myself. I went deep in this. I know it's a huge problem that a lot of people face, and it's the biggest problem that you need to be able to solve in scaling a business is how is it that I build a sales function that doesn't depend on me? So we go deep into this. We understand what rainmakers look like. We understand the fundamental aspects that you need to get out of your head and build into a sales function and into a team. We talk about hiring the right salespeople, how to manage them, how to remunerate them at different stages in the process. We really do take a deep dive into building out a sales function. So if this is a challenge that you're facing, you don't want to miss this one now at all. Then we go into the realities of how he's created two businesses at the same time, and then the opportunity that he had of discussing the exitability of both businesses and what he's managed to learn around what is determined by the value of his companies and what he's thinking about in this new chapter of his entrepreneurial journey now that he's looking up ahead and thinking about exit, thinking about freedom, and how he's going about doing that. So not only do we get the full rundown of building a sales function to the point of having rainmakers, we're now at the stage of thinking about what does the next chapter of my life look like as a founder entrepreneur and building this business, a whole business that doesn't depend on me for everything. So it's an exciting conversation through multiple steps of the entrepreneurial journey, and it's not something that you want to miss. Now, if this is the first episode of the Founder Files that you're listening to, or maybe a couple that you've listened to and you're not subscribed, I'd suggest subscribing now. Because founders like Phil, who are willing and able to share so many insights that they have about very specific topics, this is the place where they do it, right? Where we get into deep, practical, insightful conversations to understand how it is that these founders scaled their business or built out sales functions so that you can avoid years of trial and error in scaling your own business. So if this sounds like the kind of podcast for you, then make sure that you're subscribing and following now to make sure that you don't miss any more episodes like this. Also, it's the best way to support the podcast, and it's the best way to make me feel happy as the podcast host. So click subscribe now. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, over to Phillip Tillman. Let's find out a lot more about building out a sales function that can scale without us. Welcome to the Founder Files, the podcast that's like eavesdropping on a conversation with a successful entrepreneur over a fireside chat. Join me, Cameron Coots, through this unique experience of unfiltered stories and insights from scaling founders around the globe as they share their ups, downs, and everything in between. Hey Phil, welcome to the Founder Files. I'm keen to chat about your story. There's many different chapters around different life cycle stages and how we grow a business, the decisions that you make, the motivations that you have as a founder. And I think there's so many epic insights we're going to get from your story. So thank you for joining us. I can't wait to get into it.
Very well, Cameron, thank you very much for inviting me on. It's lovely to be here.
So I think first question for those that don't know you or don't know your businesses, SurTech, Konsise, chat to me about the businesses and business models so we can just wrap our heads around this.
Sure, by all means. So the SurTech group of businesses is fundamentally a distribution. So we are very lucky to have the exclusive distribution of an international software company that sells to large enterprises in across Africa. And my biggest comparison is that it's not too dissimilar to distributing, having a Nissan distribution. Right? Somebody else decides what you sell. Somebody else decides what the product is. They love the fact that you're in a country that they don't want to be in. And as a result, they don't mind you making a decent amount of money off keeping sales going in that country. We do it in a slightly different way because it's software sales, so we don't have to go and see customers and take them on test drives. But it is fundamentally an annuity revenue business model of a third-party software tool. The main business is called SurTech, which distributes this international product. But because it's a distribution business, there's inherently a lack of certain control. In other words, one day the main software company can come along and kill us dead at the end of our agreement, just as they could if you were distributing anything else. And so one of the things we've done is to be able to try and de-risk this a little bit by developing our own software to be able to kind of take to market, where we completely take away that risk, albeit introduce a whole host of others. But of course, fundamentally, those business models are identical. The great thing about getting into this 10 years ago is that the whole business model of subscription was starting. Subscription, of course, is now everywhere in everything we do. And software used to be a business model that you would sell perpetually. In other words, you would sell a license, which they always owned, and then you'd charge a 20% support and maintenance fee. Not too dissimilar to a lawnmower, right? Sell the thing and then you have to charge them some maintenance to keep it up to date. Very lucky that subscription economy means that people will pay that every year plus some inflation, and it's now just a standard thing to be able to do. And so that business model, I have to say, has got to be the best business model on the planet, whether you are Netflix or you are Microsoft or Spotify. And the idea that the minute people stop, they stop paying you, but they lose access to your product immediately is a really good business model if you've got a product that people really need. So fundamentally, a sales business with an annuity revenue model, if you had to break it down to a general thing.
So on that, what are you selling?
So we sell. Large organizations have a very large governance level. Very boring this sounds, and of course, in some respect it is. That governance level starts at things like board meetings and management meetings, and we sell software that helps organizations to manage those meetings. So the biggest companies in the country use this software in order to put together their board packs, distribute them to the hundreds of directors and meeting attendees, which they can electronically put their notes on. They can review, collaborate in an incredibly secure way. So that's how they govern their board meetings. And just one level below that, they have committees like audit management and risk management and compliance. And those committees need software to be able to gather the relevant data in order to report to board levels, fundamentally from a risk mitigation perspective. So we sell to large organizations that need to be well governed. As a society, we are increasingly, enormously governed by increased regulation and legislation, and then increasingly things like carbon credits and triple bottom line and BE and all kinds of stuff. So organizations just have to do more and more and more of this. One of my former partners used to say, it is better to sell with a stick than a carrot, because they have to have it. They have to do the function, right? That's not debatable. If you want to be in business, you have to do this. You just have to be the best tool that helps them do the function. We're very lucky, again, not our tool, but we're very lucky to distribute the best tool to be able to do that. And that's what the software actually does.
So, I mean, you obviously insinuated the story of starting off SurTech, and I love the way that you just extend this so directly and candidly as a distribution model. Again, on your points of subscription, it really is the best, because it's why VCs love SaaS businesses to invest in them. And yeah, part of the story was, Konsise came from a point of, what's stopping them from vertically integrating and kind of coming into the space and just selling directly. So we've got to de-risk ourselves, de-risk the core business. So there's a lot to unpack there, lots of decisions, lots of things that have happened in quite an extensive number of years. So I want to unpack this piece by piece. And let's just start off with, what was the founding story of SurTech? Like, how did you end up starting the business, and why this one?
Sure. So, I was sitting in an MBA class, actually, because I thought I needed an MBA to make myself better qualified so that other people would judge me better and I could earn more money, which of course is 95% plus of the population. And partway through that, in the entrepreneur model, the entrepreneur module, we had to do a 1-minute pitch. And that 1-minute pitch was what the starting business within the SurTech group was, which was a SAP consulting business. I did a 1-minute pitch and I thought, I can do this, right? If anybody can. I didn't think I was better, that I thought I could work hard enough that I could do what anyone else might be able to. And I effectively went back within a week or so. I had sold my house, or put my house for sale. I'd quit my job. I had activated a divorce, because one of the biggest weighting downs is having the wrong partner in your life, because I'd wanted to be an entrepreneur for a long time. and sold everything. And I was kind of ready to start this business and then go out and look for a business partner to be able to do that. I have to say at this point, I'd never seen the software that I wanted to go and consult on. I just knew reputationally there would be a market for it. So it was a little bit of a leap of faith. In hindsight, entrepreneurs, it's nice not to have a plan B because you've got to make plan A work. And so really that's where the business started. And that while I was, what ended up happening is I was partnering with another company to be able to do that. And they kindly invited me into their fold. I used their brand and it was a almost 50-50 relationship. And they had a product business within their organization that I didn't know what a product business was at the time compared to a consulting business. I understood selling a bit of software and man hours. And this product business was losing money. And I was actually in East Africa selling the product that we were doing. And this other company was just saying, but hold on, aren't you from the company that sells the product business? Can't we get a quote on that? So I went back and said, guys, what is this business? And it was losing money. And they gave me the opportunity to kind of buy that, which is ironic because I swapped about the same share in a consulting business making money for the same share in a product business that was losing tons of money. And in hindsight, I got the good deal because a product business has much more potential than the consulting business. And so that's how SurTech started. I mean, we won our first few customers. We were very lucky to do so. And from there, the consulting business, it was very clear to me within kind of 6 months ago or so that the future was in a product business, and sold off the consulting business to a company called EOH, who I'm sure we all remember fondly for some of its bad press. And then just focus exclusively on this product business and back that single horse all the way. And so that product business, the product we were distributing was actually quite a small Canadian product, but they did a very big merger and then they had a very big buyout. And so as a result, this sales bag that I had to take to market moved from products that were on average selling at $2,000 to $5,000 to selling kind of between $25,000 and $50,000. Absolutely none of which I can claim any credit for. Entirely an externality. What we can claim credit for is during that time, we built up a strong sales presence. And so this international organization who's looking in says, well, of all the countries I can go put some money and invest in sales, why would I do it there when we've got people doing it? I can go do it in a bunch of places that aren't so difficult to sell to, that don't have certain legislative barriers that South Africa loves. And so again, from an externality, this just grew. And it's continued to do so. So again, I feel like we've been very, very lucky with the product that we've been distributing.
Well, I think the final point there is, what is the size of the market for us to be able to grow into here? And although this is a country dominated by a lot of oligopolies, it's just there's few clients for the kind of system like Diligent, really, at the end of the day, compared relatively to the markets that they would be dominating. And it's like what that left is the opportunity for you is it's like why would we build this capability here? We're selling there. Our return on attention is way better in the US, the EU, UK, in terms of where it is that we can grow. So there's a perfect recipe for you to be like, listen, we win from the situation. Let me take this and run.
But when I was making decisions about investing heavily, I had a chat with the CEO of the main business, and she said to me, does it give you any confidence that if I tell you that I have $1, I will put it anywhere on the planet before I put it in Africa? But no, I can't extend your agreement until it's due. But do you think we're coming? Because we're not. The only risk is the deals you don't do. And so then I knew that it was in my hands. And I feel that South Africa is a distribution economy. We make very, very little, distribute enormously, almost all international stuff. The stuff we do make, so like agriculture, we export anyway. So the stuff that's consumed locally is main distributed. And if you recognize that, that's kind of the business model of the country. And name a business that isn't pretty much a distribution model. And your comment and reflect to the local market, the TAM, right, the total addressable market. It's actually pretty high. I mean, it's in the kind of 50 to 100 millions of dollars in our context, let alone context of other big software companies. The problem is there can't be lots of these types of organizations in the US. So in the US, so we've got 4 major banks, right? You might consider Capitec a fifth. Every city has more than that in America. I mean, just one city has a bigger economy than a whole country. And so I accept that this, the advantage for us is that it was a defocal point for them. But of course, that just left a gaping opportunity for us to be able to move into. And I feel like those opportunities are constantly there. There's constantly new products, features, softwares, technologies, everything that's out there that nobody wants to go and shift to South Africa at all. And if I may comment on that, when I was actually looking for a product, I searched the top technologies. Deloitte used to publish this top technologies internationally. It was British, American, European companies. I called them all. Nobody would return my call. Why would I want to speak to somebody down in Africa? I just couldn't find a product. And even though they had no customers here, their attention, they just weren't prepared to spend mind and attention on an economy that small. And so finding a company that actually wanted to do business with another company in Africa, I think is also quite unique. Not many do.
Well, yeah, if you can open that door, it sounds like a bit of a no-brainer to a company that's got no intentional approach to grow here. Sounds like an excellent recipe, but also I guess it shows the right founder for this business is the fact that it shows those sales skills and negotiation in the beginning to be able to secure this relationship. But it's like a distribution exclusive partnership into this country, and you can bank on this forever. Although there's still that risk at the end of the day.
There's still that risk. So there's 2 real risks. One is a financial risk, which is to say that they may get so greedy for the money that they say, well, hold on, that annuity revenue base is now so high. Why do we need you to keep renewing it? They renew because of our product. So sure, we might lose 5% of the customers, but all that margin we were paying you is gone. Right. So just from a pure commercial perspective, somebody might make that decision. And the other one, which I think is the biggest risk actually, is personalities. You get a change at the top. In fact, we recently had this. We had a change at the top. The guy used to come from South Africa, thinks he knows the market incredibly well, and thinks that they should be telling us how to do it. Other people in the organization are thinking, why on earth is he even spending a minute of his brain on that territory when actually there's much bigger fish to fry? And so personalities is actually the biggest risk. And so when there's a change at the top of the organization or there's mergers or so on, my biggest risk is actually the people. And I get on a plane and go anywhere in the world to go and develop that relationship and make sure they know what we bring. And very luckily, those US, UK, Canadian companies want to deal with similar ilk of people who are culturally the same and they understand. Luckily, as an immigrant to South Africa, I have a very similar culture, and they that works, right? They feel, you can leave those meetings. They think, okay, I know who this person is, right? They could have been working next to me if they were still in this country. And so that's, that relationship part is a really big one.
Yeah, 100%. But I mean, it's there's just so many little insights around why you being the right fit for a distribution business makes sense. Everything from the mindset, the skill set, etc. But like, let's talk to me now. It's like I think what's obvious is you clearly know how to sell. You clearly know how to sell this product too. What about building that first sales function in SurTech? What was that like? What did you struggle with?
Sure. So important to note, my background is sales. I mean, I came straight out of university at 21, and other than my short stint as a holiday rep in Ibiza, I went straight into a sales job. And so I understand that incredibly well. And that was kind of the early 90s where canvassing and cold calling was absolutely the done thing. Nobody hid away from it. The photocopying companies loved that kind of stuff. And so kind of when I started getting into that business, I really only knew one way, which is direct. You build a database, which in the sales world you call your TAM, your total addressable market. South Africa, that's easy because there's not many of them. Right? Can you say, guys, these are the companies that could possibly afford what we want to be able to do. Let's go find out who are the right people, and we'll go and knock on doors and go and introduce ourselves. And as much as people say today that cold calling is dead, they were saying it then just as much. And it is just as false today as it was then, that people don't want you to go and knock their door down. They categorically do. They just want you to do it sometimes in slightly different ways.
So before you continue, let's just elaborate on that, because I think there's a lot of people here that are completely allergic to the concept of cold calling, especially receiving it. But like everyone in terms of rejection sensitivity, but the picking up the phone, right? And this is a commonality of anyone that I've spoken to that's exceptional at sales. They have no issue picking up the phone and trying to speak to a stranger and making 100 calls in a day to make a deal. Like that's just it's just part of the process. Talk to me around this in terms of this point of people want you to knock down their door in order to sell to them.
Sure. So, I mean, if it's approached in the right way, I think I'll possibly use a couple of examples. So, the first one is recruitment companies. Recruitment companies are unashamedly phone-based businesses. You think they do interviews, they don't. They have phone time. So they have internal systems that measure how long you're on the phone. And it's normally 4 hours a day. 4 hours in your workday, you are talking to people. Sure, you're talking to internally people coming in. Sure, you're calling for jobs on the way out, but you are just talking to people all day long. And it's a non-negotiable. So one of the great things, if you're ever wondering what kind of salesperson do I start with, go find an ex-recruiter. Because I promise you, they have no fear on picking up a phone to anybody. And so to your point, at 21, of course, I was scared to pick up a phone. I didn't know what to say or how to say it. And so phone fright is very real. And so for any entrepreneurs listening to this, and they were accountants or HR or some other function that moved into this, it is their biggest possible hurdle that they have to get over to just go and pick up a phone and go and speak to somebody. And there's just so many ways to do that. You can be incredibly brash, the Wolf of Wall Street style stuff. And by the way, I worked in an environment like that. And I think if it existed today, it would work just as well as it did then. Um, uh, and you see the most incredible. So I'll rephrase that. So we've got a young team of people, and we get people coming in at 21, 22 years old, and they've never called anybody, right? The only thing I understand is a mobile phone. Now they have a headset on, and they have to develop their own slight style about how do they make a call. And that can start with, hey Cameron, my name's Blake. If you don't mind, can I have 2 minutes of your time? At the end of that call, at the end of that 2 minutes, you can either slam the phone down on me, or this could be the first day of the rest of your life. Right? And who's not going to say, okay, Cameron, you've got 30 seconds. What do you want? Right? Somebody who does that right. Now, unfortunately, in South Africa, what we first do is, hi, Cameron, how are you? First thing you think is, oh my God, I don't care, right, what you want to think. And so this is where the Americans are just amazing at this. They are unashamedly a sales nation, and they don't care about it, right? They will come up and they will put it out there as to why they're calling you. And so one just has to get over phone fright. You have to pick up the phone and call the right person. Now, increasingly, we have, so that's cold calling. There's a thing called warm calling now. Now, warm calling is when you seeded it. So I'm calling Cameron and I want to speak to him. So I'm going to send him 3 or 4 emails. I'm going to do a bit of research. I know he's got long hair. He must be a hippie, right? He must love camping in the background. So I'm going to get some things that we correlate on and say, hey, Cameron, you probably saw my emails. I just wanted to chat to you. Right? And so for some reason, Cameron's going to give me an extra 20 seconds because we've now got a relationship. He's seen my name before and there's some familiarity. And the answer is it's warm. And I don't debate that. And that's where I talked about there's a slightly different method to being able to do it. But fundamentally, I've never spoken to Cameron before. And Cameron knows full well that I want to sell to him.
And that's the simple framing that I really like, is the difference between cold and warm is it's the exact same thing. The warm is just going to give you a little bit of extra time.
That's all it's going to do. It's going to give you a little bit of extra time. But great salespeople would have bought the time anyway. Right. They just have that thing in their voice. And you can start a call. Cameron, I have been dying to speak to you for so long. Tell me after an enthusiastic call like that you won't think, okay, who's this person? Tell me more. I'm interested. As opposed to, hi, is that Cameron? Are you the head of this team? Can I ask you a question? It's really important. And so it's a sales skill. And one of the frustrations for me when I first moved to South Africa 20 years ago was I couldn't get a sales job because nobody advertised or recognized that they had salespeople. And coming from the UK and the US businesses, where sales was a very, very senior profession, that was just absurd to me. And so I still think we hide behind this far too much. A friend of mine's father, I'm a bit of name dropping here, was the CEO of Rolls-Royce for Asia for a while. And he said to me, do you know, I sell airplane engines. I just happen to sell to prime ministers for billions, but that's all I do. And his next job was selling military tanks to another type of buyer. He was a salesman just on a different level and was completely unashamed for that. And I think in South Africa, and one of my great examples of this is that if you look at estate agents in almost any country in the world, they're young, ambitious, aggressive people. If you come to South Africa, they're a minimum of 55. They can't get any other job. you look at these and think, how are these salespeople, right? These are the people who seem to have dropped out of the economic ladder. And this doesn't make any sense to me. So recognizing sales as a profession is a significant weakness in South Africa, and people tend to fall into it rather than choose it. And I think that's a black mark on our economic progress as a country.
Well, it's the irony. It's like it's the ultimate skill that you need to succeed in business, right? Because the point is, it's like even if you're not selling a product, you're still engaging in persuasion and influence at some point or another. Specifically, the more senior in an organization that you become, and that people really undersell the importance of selling.
What's the top line on an income statement?
Revenue.
Revenue is sales, right? In fact, some companies don't call it revenue; they call it sales. Right? So everything else flows from that. Every cost of sale that you buy, every expense that you have in order to achieve something is to achieve those sales. And so it is clear to me that so if there's any entrepreneurs listening to this and their background is sales, guys, you have the ultimate advantage. It is so easy for you to employ a finance person to count your money, right? A HR person to deal with your employees. And really easy. But I promise you, if you're the finance guy, go find that salesperson who's going to grow your business. That's tough. That's really tough. That's going to cost you significant equity, possibly even like half your business. Because they're going to say, but I'm bringing all the customers. What are you doing? I had the idea. That doesn't mean anything. On a slight adjacent, I'm currently doing a law degree, and the current module is intellectual property and in copyright. And many of the case laws have established there is no copyright for an idea. There's only copyright for the expression. So it doesn't matter what you thought of or what you wanted to be able to do or what you suggested. All the money goes to the person who did it. All of it. Not one piece goes to the idea, the person who had the idea. And so action over ideas is the capitalist economy.
100%. Okay, so this has clearly showed a lot of your own philosophy, your own motivation, your own principle that goes into the sales playbook. So what I want to know is, where you're at now is, I'm assuming, the well-oiled sales function within your business is within two businesses, right, that you've built and you've trained and you've systematized an approach towards selling that other people are running. Talk to me about when you were setting that up, right? What was some of the first kind of hurdles that you had to overcome to get other people to sell like you?
So when first establishing a sales team, let's assume you're the CEO and you're doing the sales. So you're the all-rounder. You know how to pick up the phone, do the persuasion, close the deal, do the contract, and then typically hand over the execution, unless you're in a consulting business, which I could argue is not really a business, but that's a separate issue. And then I'm joking, that can be just a slick hit. So
No, I'm curious to know your thoughts.
yeah, well, I'll come to that. But they so that's the first thing you choose. So to try and emulate yourself. And so you're looking for salespeople that can do it all. You're looking for a salesperson that has had the background where they don't mind picking up the cold call. You have, they have been able to do demonstration, do the persuasion, and they're capable of closing what hopefully is a large deal. Now that's an enormous array of skills. And the problem I found with that after a while is these senior salespeople get a taste for the bigger deals. And the last thing they want to do is pick up a phone, right? They've got their pipeline and they're going to try and actively manage this. Maybe for the first couple of months in your business, they'll prospect. But after that, they're like, guys, I'm too senior to do this. And that became quite a consistent mentality. And so, but prospecting did not become in any way less valuable, just less desirable for senior salespeople to do. And so what we were able to do, and cash flow allowed us to be able to do, is actually break up. If you thought about what one salespeople used to do, we developed a team that used to do each function. So the first thing is what we call a demand generation team. Now, in the US, a demand generation team uses a whole bunch of marketing to get inbound leads. That's not possible in Africa because we don't have the databases for it. So I have a team of kind of 12 to 18 people who sit there all day and all they do is find the right person. So if I'm looking for the CIO of certain types of companies all over Africa, they just find that person. They call companies, they use LinkedIn, they find the person, they've got John Smith, and this is his telephone number and this is his email address. And that's their job. They're researchers, right? Not even prospectors, right? Because they're not actually asking for anything at the moment. They're just finding the right person. So they're manually doing what Americans do using Zoom info, right? Because there's a company that does this stuff for you. So that was the first thing. You build your TAM yourself.
Yeah, so sorry, but before that, there's obviously the step before is they need to know what to research, right? So it's kind of you've articulated, you structured this ICP, you've broken down this kind of like format around what is it they look for, and then they go research
So
it.
that is a fair point. You need to understand who you're selling to. So in our particular case, you need to know that you have a product, and that product is going to be bought by a CRO, a head of risk, a head of finance, a head of construction, depending on whatever product it is, who the buyers are. So certainly you have to be able to go and find those buyers. So for example, if you were selling to retail, you'd have to go and find all the retailers and find who the main buyers were and who the influencers were, etc., and so on. So a fair point. I've missed the step of the ICP. Now remember, as a distribution business, that's dictated to us, right? Because we have a product. So we already know, it's very clear to us who's going to buy that product. And so it's not really a variable. And we didn't have to choose who we're going to sell it to because we're buying a product. And so in the same way, if you were importing Hiluxes, you know that you're after, on average, an Afrikaans male who's going to come and buy that and keep it outside his school in Krugersdorp. You can cut that bit out; it might sound prejudiced, but but you certainly got to develop that initial customer profile, and then go find them. Now, developing the ICP, of course, is still a bit of it's still a bit of guesswork, because in organization 1, that person carries this title. In organization 2, they carry the title. And so if you're looking for the person, for example, in our Konsise business, for somebody who actually submits the taxes to the revenue authority, you have to ask the question, because that could be a financial controller, a financial analyst, it could be the CFO, it could be the finance manager. And so it's not as obvious as just picking up the phone and calling head of finance. And so the researching part of that is actually the more complex part, in my view.
Interesting.
I say complex,
Okay.
it's the more time-consuming part, right? There's a lot of manual effort goes into that, and our phone bill is absolutely astronomical. But to give you context, we add something like 3,000 to 5,000 contacts a week into our system. These are qualified contacts where we've got the title, we know their email address, and all of their spelling is correct in their names, and that person is then correct and available to start prospecting to, which can be in one of two ways. Once you've got the database, you're going to start marketing to them, right? And so there's a few tools out there like SalesLoft and Pardot and HubSpot who do seed marketing, right? So they're out there sending you the right information to slowly seed your mind that you need this product, and look at John, didn't he do well, and how good he is now that he's using this product, and how amazing his life is, to be able to do that. And so that marketing starts. And then after that, kind of 2 months into that process is when the sales development starts. Okay, so this was the second thing. So the first thing the old guy used to do when he started, I have to find who to speak to. The second thing is I have to pick up the phone and find if there's interest. That's what's now called sales development. And it's an established function. And there's enormous software tools that only do this. It's called Outreach and SalesLoft. This is all they do. And so there are effectively tools that allow organizations to be outreach to these customers. And those things combine emails, LinkedIn invites, but most importantly, telephone calls, right? Because all of those are seeding to be able to pick up a telephone and say, hey, Mr. Smith, I want to be able to sell this to you, and I think you'd be really interested. Can I set up a meeting with our senior business development manager? And so on. And that's where that more senior guy is then involved, who's then on a call, which is effectively a discovery call, where you're speaking to the customer. Hey, Mr. Customer, I understand you're at this thing. If we could do this for you, wouldn't it be great? What is your thought around this? Have you got a budget? Who else would be involved in the decision-making cycle? And so we broke all of that into separate parts. And being a software company, we also had another further part, which is that the salespeople who used to do all their own demos don't even do that anymore. We have a pre-sales specialist. So if you're selling a finance software, you'll have an accountant as part of your sales team, and the accountant will do that demonstration and talk to the customer in their own language, in their own method. So the salesperson who's actually doing the deal, gets all the commission, gets to ring the bell, is effectively a glorified deal closer. It's all happening around them. But those deal closers are tough to find, and they're the rainmakers, and they can turn a deal from kind of $20,000 to $100,000, and that's really where
Why are they so hard to find?
Important. They're so hard to find in South Africa because we don't breed them at all. And when everybody thinks to get in senior sales, why would I not go and do a real job? Secondly, they're hard to find domestically because they are enormously sought after in Europe. And Europeans come and they take them to the Netherlands, and you tell them that you're going to educate their children and you're going to pay for their university fees as part of the package, and you've got a low tax base and tax incentives, and the university and schooling's in English and all that kind of stuff. And we've lost enormous ones. Of all the jobs we look for, all the roles we hire for in Africa, the hardest one is the sales rainmaker. Hardest by a long shot.
So I mean, what that basically insinuates is that our only approach is to really build it out internally within the company.
We've had enormous success in building that out now. Yes, 100%.
How did you do that?
That's what takes the time. Unfortunately, these youngsters, or I say youngsters, people who were sales development, effectively start pulling through into senior. Now, of course, when you do find a rainmaker, you need to be able to hold on to them. They need to be correctly incentivized, well treated, given opportunities, and that's the most important part. But there's no question that on a weekly basis, somebody is approaching that person.
So what I want to know now is I think what's obvious about a rainmaker is the results and the numbers. But what is it that I can do to cultivate that within myself or someone within my team? I'd like to pause here for a moment to talk about why it is that we run the Founder Files in the first place, why we've done over 100 episodes, and why we have no intention of stopping anytime soon, and how it is that we go about actually funding this so consistently. And to start off with, the purpose of the Founder Files is to give established entrepreneurs practical stories and insights from people that have been there before, so you can avoid years of trial and error in scaling your own business. And the reason why this is so important to us is it relates very directly to what the purpose of Metavolve is, which is the entity that funds the Founder Files in the first place. And that is to accelerate the time it takes for entrepreneurs to build businesses that are able to thrive without them. Practically, what that looks like is our mission statement to ensure that as many founders as possible can take a holiday where they actually switch off whilst their business keeps growing. And the reason why this mission is so important to us is because as many entrepreneurs, we built these businesses to potentially work less, right? Have a sense of freedom. But we found ourselves working harder than ever. And we thought when we conquered these original problems around survivability and getting to product market fit, we then achieved growth. And then the nature of the problems that we have now fundamentally changed. And we found ourselves working harder than ever, right? We're working longer hours, we're making harder decisions, people are coming to us, we're having to put out fires, and it can feel so intense, and we're constantly getting pulled back into operations because of the fundamental reason that no one knows our business like we do. And this is where Metavolve comes in. We use strategy as the process to really download all of your knowledge, all your thinking about your business, about your market, about your product into your management team so that they can be empowered to execute while you focus on growth or frankly, doing what it is that you want with your time. So if you want to hear more about what Metavolve does and how Metavolve can help you attain a new level of freedom in your scale up, then click on the link in the description below and let's have a chat and a curiosity call to see how I can share some of the insights I've learned from working with and interviewing over 200 business owners in the past 3 and a bit years. But that's it from me for now. Let's get back to the episode.
That's a great question. Kind of, there's a bit of nature-nurture debate that goes into that question because salespeople are coin operated. Right? There's very few people who only care for that one gratification when you get your payslip at the end of the month. Most people are normal and they care about things like job satisfaction and so on. And so salespeople aren't. They genuinely do care about this. How does one cultivate that in yourself is a really, really good question. I think the first thing is to identify what the key thing that's driving you is. Do you really enjoy the close and the demonstration and the persuasion? As an example, I isolate everything and I spend, in terms of my customer interactions, they are almost entirely sales-based. And I love that. Right? As a salesperson, of course, why wouldn't I? That was my bread and butter. So I think finding out if it's actually what you enjoy is an important one. And then the second one is if it's not you or somebody in your team, you've got to train for this stuff. You've got to train, you've got to have a culture for it. Now, I get accused by my non-sales staff of enormously favoring the sales team, to which I say, that's right. Would you like their job? Right? Would you like to be told no 100 times a day, right? And you have to do the same thing? Or would you like to stay where you are for a third of the money? And people always stay where they are, right? And so they complain about this. And rainmakers have to be treated in accordance with that. And of course, it comes with an ego that you would expect, right? And one must have to play up to that ego. So we run very regular training sessions. So there's a plethora of books out there around training and sales training, from Grant Cardone to Jordan Belfort and many in between. And we read these books, and every once a week we sit down, we analyze several chapters. Somebody has to come and present it. We talk about what it means to be a professional salesperson. And in that respect, the person who did the psychology degree that then joined you because it was a misstep actually gets to make a conscious decision. Am I in the job of manipulation, and am I okay with that? Because that's what our job is. And if I'm not okay with that, then great, let's go join the HR team and I can serve people. And if that's what they want, fantastic. In the main, people say, okay, this is my job. I do realize how important this is. And they like it. If they get to treat it as a profession, like as a learning profession. Frustratingly, you can't do a degree in sales. Because I think a lot of people would actually enjoy it. But to your question, is the necessity of a rainmaker for a successful business is absolutely non-negotiable. Unless you are a product-led business where your product does absolutely everything, right? Xero does not need a salesperson to come visit you for you to start using them and to be hooked for life. That's a product business. Spotify didn't pick up the phone and call you, right? Neither did Netflix. Those are businesses where the product gets you in, and it has a network effect and you stay. Those businesses are absolute anomalies. They're used in every business school to show you how it should be done, but almost impossible to replicate because who can afford to make the product that good?
But that's also the exception, not the norm, right? And I think that's the advice. People try and take the advice of how to sell something like that and actually end up building the wrong thing because we're going to copy the marketing product driven approach towards sales. And it's like, actually, no, you need a sales driven approach towards sales.
If you listen to some of the early days of Airbnb, which is a true product-based business now, they were picking up the phone, trying to find apartments and places so that they could actually have some capacity on their sites. Right? It still started with somebody picking up a phone and going door to door and saying, do you have a room to spare? Would you like to make some money out of it? It always does.
So Phil, I still want to go back to this Rainmaker thing, right? Because I think there's if there's one goal that I can actually have for the rest of this conversation, it's just that if we can get that out of your head and into some other entrepreneurs about either cultivating their own rainmaking or specifically being able to do it within their team. If you had to kind of consolidate the journey that you've done to develop your best salespeople, including yourself, what are the steps that you take someone through in order to make them strong at sales? And let's the nature and nurture debate 100%, right? Don't need to convince me of that as a psychologist, but let's park the nature one for now. And let's say everything that we can control in the nurture point, what's going to spit out is just the fact that you're either going to be skilled at sales or you're a rainmaker. There's no in between. That process to get someone there, what does that look like?
So I think, first of all, it's experience. So you don't tend to get a rainmaker at 25. A rainmaker is a 35 to 40-year-old plus mature person. And so in order to have that, you either need to hire somebody who's been through those various steps. Like somebody who hasn't spent the time picking up a phone and calling and negotiating, persuading. It's very difficult for them to become a rainmaker at some point. But I think if one talks to what the psychology of a rainmaker is, which is you have a selling cycle, like you prospect, you demonstrate, they'll buy and stay. But that's not how people buy. There is a buying cycle. And a good rainmaker understands that it doesn't matter how good you are at persuasion. I can't sell you a car if you just bought one. There is a buying cycle. You're in it for 4 to 5 years, I'm using a retail example. And in our software world, we also can't sell people out of a certain cycle. And so there's two parts, one of which you must have volume. No matter what you do, you must have a lot in the pipe in order to get something out. Every rainmaker knows that, and they understand the maturity, and they're going to look at this and say, look, this quarter, I've got a target of 100,000, for example, and I need 4 times cover. So I must, going in, know that there's 400,000 that could close this month. Or sorry, this quarter in the example I'm using. Right, so they get that and they understand what cover looks like. So they're playing the odds, again, which is a very mature perspective. And the second thing is that they can articulate where the customer is in their buying cycle. And a poor salesperson doesn't have that conversation with the customer. They think, well, I sold this, I've given them a proposal, they must buy it within 3 months, despite the fact that their budget is actually 9 months away. And even then they have to go through another cycle and they haven't involved the people who are required to be part of the decision. And so back to your question, which was kind of how do you develop a rainmaker? And my only answer to that is just experience and maturity. A mature person who understands their objectives can have a conversation, can interrogate you around where are you now? Are you interested in this? What are you currently doing? Are there what are the three things that make that you value here? Oh, none of them? Well, why are we talking? Right? And if they're able to understand what those value points are, typically because they're mature enough to understand businesses, then they understand what else needs to be done to help get that customer over the line. And of course, the more complex and high value the product, the more mature that person needs to be.
Well, I think what you're speaking a lot to is that I guess maybe the difference between a rainmaker and someone who's maybe just well skilled at sales is that level of intuition that only comes with time in the seat and doing this so much and going through bigger and bigger deals. But let's maybe let's unpack the process, because I think the point there, like if we had to just put the recipe together, not even in order. I just want to get this out. The first element that you had there is like, because again, I'm still thinking as a founder, building out a business and scaling it outside of myself, right? Building out the sales function, and how is it that I can get someone else to sell, not just like me, better than me, right? And so the first step there is like, one thing I need to get out of my head is, what does my customer buying cycle look like? So one of those typical rules of thumb is, it's like, of 100 people that are in the market right now, 5 are ready to buy. Right. And so the point there is like, the difference between the rainmaker and the other people is about the fact that they're going to go and figure out as quickly as possible who are those people that are ready to buy. But they've also found tells and indicators beforehand, before I even pick up the phone, before I contact this person. I'm not even wasting my time at that level. I know, according to you saying, in terms of budget cycle, time of the year, whatever it might be, whatever these indicators are, it's like, this is the recipe that the likelihood of them buying now is high. But then, even on the first contact, the first phone, is how can I figure out as quickly as possible if they're ready to buy? And it's not the question that I'm asking is like, are they going to see the value? Are they the right customer? It's like, no, I know all these things. Are they ready to buy now? So it's either I'm going to target them immediately or go there. So if I'm playing super ignorant now. If I was there wanting to really map out what the customer buying cycle is, right, to be able to be like, because I, like, as a founder, I know it intuitively in terms of who my market is, but you're asking me to explain something to someone new. How would I get this out of myself to like map out this buying cycle for my team?
Well, it is different for every market, right? In terms of what they'll buy and what speed they'll buy at and who's involved. I think the typical buying cycle, you can just Google and see that it starts with a kind of interest, right? Then goes through to intrigue, and then they develop a need, right? And then they develop a desire, right? And then they're willing to be able to take action. But that's not always true. I think perhaps if I take a backward step, because the first part of your question clicked it to a way in which I can answer. So the business we started just a few years ago is called Konsise, and which is a product that we've developed from scratch entirely from customer feedback. And I was, of course, the first person selling this. So how did I do it? You sit in front of a customer and you demo this, and they tell you how bad this is, and then you go add a new feature, and then you keep coming back. And then you effectively develop a script. Now, I want to talk about scripts for a moment. Most people say, I don't want to sound like a script, it's unnatural, and so on. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is you can perfect a script. So do you think that when you walk into a Mercedes garage, there is not a very specific way that the Germans have decided that you greet them? And if it's a man, you take them to this part of the car first. And if it's a lady, you take them to this part of the car first. They know exactly what works as a science. And so I believe enormously in scripts. And so I literally write down a script that I say, word for word with screenshots. Click here, say this, ask that. And of course, somebody's going to do that 50 times, and then they're going to inject their personality, which is perfectly fine because they've always got a script to fall back on. And in doing that, your question was, how do you replicate what you're doing? Then you can replicate yourself, and they must be able to do it, and they'll do it 100 times. And then the next person who comes along will be able to copy exactly what they do, and they'll work from the script. And that's an easy way to be able to do it. Now, if you're selling super high-end products, you need to be able to have very mature conversations. But your script can take a customer through that and make it sound as if you know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, which I don't, by the way, understand derivatives, but if I worked in a derivative firm and I could put together a script, I'm sure I could ask a whole bunch of questions to say a number of things that made it sound like I knew slightly more than you did, and therefore, I sound like I know what I'm doing. And so the script part for me is incredibly important to be able to walk through. And a script, of course, can be question-based, right? To extract information from a customer in terms of the qualifications, to identify where they are in their buying cycle. So, so again, it has to be volume. Now, if your product is so good that you close 50% of your prospects, great. Then you need twice as many prospects as you do deals, right? If it's more likely that it's 20 times, you need 20 times your prospects for your deals, then obviously you need a much bigger volume. And so that's my honest view. And in the size business, that's working incredibly well. And so I don't need to be on most of those calls. In truth, probably where I am, it's for my own vanity rather than anything else. And the only influence I truly add is they think like they're dealing with the CEO and it means something, but they were seeing the same software. They were being given exactly the same line.
Okay, so if we had to just simplify it down to building out that sales function, as you put it down to those three things. If it's really knowing that customer buying cycle, having the right questions to be able to identify where they are as quickly as possible within that approach, and empowering the team to be able to do so, and then having scripts for every part of that buying cycle and being able to get the person to the next step. That's it.
Yep, absolutely. And if you walk into McDonald's, they know they have to say the same thing, right? They're told what to say, how to do it. Those fries cook for 2 minutes, 33 seconds, and an alarm goes off, and you better be there taking that thing off because it is an exact methodology and script as to how they work. And flipping burgers is no different than most parts of a business. And if you think the business is so special that every scenario is unique, I'm not sure that you have a business that's repeatable, right? That's a very hard business to scale.
So then, okay, so we've got those three steps to the sales function now in terms of cultivating that Rainmaker. And then I promise I'll let this drop and we'll move on to the next
That's okay.
topic.
I've got no problem.
So we've got those three main things. So the one thing I got out so far is getting that Rainmaker, or at least close to it as possible, right? Is what's the part of the sales process that motivates you the most? I think it's kind of knowing that part. Obviously, if it's the negotiation, the close, that's the highest predicted likelihood of a Rainmaker, right? Because that's the sharp end of the stick. That's where the money gets made. But I think there's an inherent nature of if we move outside of Rainmaker, how can you just get the best salesperson knowing that there's many different stages to sales within a business, right? And so this individual is like, which part of the process do they like the most? Knowing that part. And then what next?
Well, then training them on that specific part and rewarding. So one of my former business coaches used to say, "What's important gets rewarded. What's rewarded gets repeated." Right? And so, if it's important to you, are you measuring it to start with? And if you're not measuring it, so if you don't know how many demos happened last week in your business, demonstration, persuasion, whatever it is you do in your business, I have no idea how you're going to know how your sales cycle is running. And so if the outcome, so we have a number of different metrics. So to deviate slightly from your question, so our head of a sales development team is not worried about deals that close. He's worried about prospects that turn into an accepted opportunity, and his team get paid money for that because opportunities are worth money, right? So that's his metric and his success. Another person's is, of course, closing the deal. So your question was, how do you make sure that the Rainmaker does it? And for me, that's incentives. Got to be the incentive because salespeople are very, very coin operated to achieve those goals. Now, of course, they've also got to enjoy the job, right? And I don't debate that. But by the time you get to that level, the pleasure must be intrinsic. No matter what you're selling, you must enjoy the customer engagement, the type of customer you're dealing with, the nature of the sale, the questions in the interaction. It is certainly more fun. So I used to sell a product when I'm not kidding you. We went to Abs and we sold to a guy in the back of a broom cupboard in the telecoms team, right, to do that. And it was a high value product. Whereas now we sell a lower value product, but we deal with CEOs and CFOs at the biggest companies. And it is much more pleasurable to deal and interact at the C-suite. So certainly it can't just be about the money. But anyway, so I think your argument is cultivating, and in some respects, it's also a numbers game, right? You have 5 people who are junior salespeople, and one of them is going to make a senior salesperson, and they'll show you the maturity and the hard work to be able to do it. And probably the first time, just like me, they didn't do it because of maturity; they did it because of hard work. But that turned into maturity.
Define maturity.
So the maturity is so. If there are a number of people in our business who could, no matter how senior that customer might be, without any prior knowledge, could walk in, say, Mr. Customer, allow me to ask a few questions, and with those few questions could gauge exactly where they are and how to have a conversation with what their customer needs. And including saying, Mr. Customer, I don't think we've got the right software for you. That's maturity. Somebody you could just let go and have that discussion. Inherently, they must have very in-depth domain knowledge. Not necessarily about the product, but if I'm selling cars, I must understand the motor industry and the context in which I'm selling it. Then I have to understand my product incredibly well, and then surround that by a set of sales skills. So some of our people, as I've mentioned, are specialists. So if you're selling finance software, you can have an accountant. That accountant is not a salesperson, but their persuasive abilities are through the roof because of their product and their market knowledge. So you've got to have the trifecta. You've got to be able to talk domain, you've got to be able to talk product, and you've got to be able to negotiate and have the sales skills around qualifying questions, forecasting accuracy, and so on, and to be able to do that. And one can understand why you need maturity to be able to achieve that. And so that's where the whole maturity. Jerry Maguire, I don't know if you know, you looked so young, you might not, but they call it the Quan. So if you've seen the Quan, it's like he wanted the Quan. You've got to watch this. And what's the Quan? The Quan is just everything. It's the last bit. What is it? Well, I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it, right? And there's some salespeople just have that, right? They just know how to take that deal further, and they have that ability to do it. And in some cases, some people just don't. They just don't have that maturity. Ironically, if you see people from very mature families, like where their mother or father is kind of very mature, especially if they've kind of worked in the business world, they just inherently have adopted this comprehension and the commercial understanding of how things work. And they approach things in a very calm, kind of mature manner. And certainly in my case, maturity comes with age, which is why I don't believe that this thing happens at 25. Sure, you can be a high volume, low value product seller at 25, right? If you're shipping low volume products, but very hard to be that high volume seller. And do you know that in the consulting firms, if you went to the Big Four, they are upside down. The more senior you get, the more you are only responsible for sales. A partner in the Big Four's only job is to sell and get revenue, not delivery at all in any way. Whereas in most organizations, the salesperson starts at the bottom and they have to work their way up, right, to doing less and less actual direct customer interaction. Because to go and sell a 50 million Rand a year audit or consulting service takes a hell of a lot of knowledge and maturity.
Yeah, 100%. I've got 2 more questions on this. The first one that I want to ask is, if we're taking someone from immaturity to maturity, how do we accelerate that as fast as possible? And I'm not going to accept the cop-out answer of experience.
No, so experience is an outcome, right? And so the answer has got to be training and patience. So it just doesn't happen overnight. Nothing is quick in this respect. And that person just have to be given the opportunity to be in front of customers, to make the pitch, to do the demonstrations, and they must just get that right. And we put people through a very intensive process early on that they just have to get that. And if they can't get it, they can't make it. It doesn't matter how good a salesperson they were selling HP products, because these things sell themselves, right? Or selling IBM. So in fact, we call those golf course salespeople. So in our industry, IBM used to be sold on the golf course. I played golf with this chap, and he controlled a 1 billion Rand budget, and all I needed to do was get 10%. We had a great relationship. He told me when the tender was coming out, and I went and got it. There's very little involved in actually selling there. It's very relationship centric. We're not that business, and I think increasingly those businesses don't exist anymore, where you can just sell that outside of tenderpreneurs, of course. And so they've just got to be given the opportunity to practice and do that, and be given a seat at the senior table. I don't know any other way to do it. So certainly, if I have a senior meeting for something, I will drag people along. Guys, come and watch how this meeting happens. They don't need to say anything. They just need to see how normal it is for us normal salespeople to be having a conversation with the CFO, and we're going to be materially affecting their business and the way they do stuff, and to include them in that. And that's for clarity though. The first few, it's very difficult to nurture. Right? You can't start from scratch and expect to nurture somebody for the next 10 years because you don't have a business in 10 years if you're not selling now. And some of those you do have to hire.
Perfect segue. This is my next question, right? So it's about understanding how, from a hiring perspective, how can you, because for me, the entire purpose of a recruitment process is to predict future job performance in a role, right? That's the point of the process. So how is it that you can get people with the highest predicted sales performance in your hiring process? How do you get the best people there pre-training, pre-onboarding?
Sure. So I would like to clarify that at no way, shape, or form are we immensely successful at this, because salespeople, by their nature, are capable of creating a cloud instead of certainty. Right? They're good at selling themselves, as they should be. But your point was, how do you get the future predictor? And the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So in the event, in an ideal world, you're selling product A and your competitor is selling product B, which is almost identical, and he or she is their top salesperson, and they can come into you and they can tell you, this is how I work, this is the deals that I closed, this is how I do it. And then you can go and do references on that, and you can get confirmation that in fact, John or Jane was the top salesperson and everything they said is true for the last 5 years. And there's no other way to do it to that. Now, there's a process that we follow called top grading, which is an official methodology for interviewing. And in fact, it doesn't talk too much about the specifics of the role. It actually goes into depth. Tell me about the previous role. What did you think you did well? And what do you think you did badly? Now, when I go and ask your boss, what's he or she going to say about you? And then when you do a reference, you're going to say, guess what? I spoke with Cameron and he said to me that he was really good at admin and closing the deal. And that you would agree. And that boss is going to say, well, either yes, they agree, or what is he talking about? He's crap. We had to fire him because he didn't do any deals, or his admin's atrocious. And so I think the first thing is getting good at interviewing, and we hire an external party to come and do those interviews because it's not an easy thing to do. So all of our interviews above a very junior level have a third party that does the interview, the main interview.
Who's that third party?
It's a guy called Anton Wertster, forgive my pronunciation, from a company called LifeQuest. And he follows this methodology, right? And it's incredibly insightful. And so we can look at that and say, well, hold on, at the last job, you were unhappy with A, B, C, D, and it was their fault. And at the previous job, you were unhappy with D, E, F, G, and that was their fault. So everywhere you go, you don't succeed, but it's their company's fault. And you think you're going to come here and be successful. No, it's not going to work like that. Whereas what you're looking for, somebody who can say, okay, what was your target in that company 5 years ago? And they will know what their target was. Cool. Just tell me your 3 biggest deals. How did you deal? What was the biggest objections you got? And that person will be able to answer them. What was your biggest loss? They will be able to know, I lost this deal because of this and that. We didn't have this feature. It was really important to them. And the customer cared, right? That was what they wanted. So they went to our biggest competitor who's got that feature, even though it's not great at other things. They'll be able to tell you that based on prior behavior. And in every case, that works. Excluding culture fits, of course. You might get a salesperson who's great in photocopying, who isn't a great fit for your organization because they don't take cocaine on the desk where you are. But otherwise, it's a really good predictor. But having said that, I'd like to clarify that we fail all the time. A salesperson comes in, sells themselves, and they fail all the time. But where you've got somebody who's got a long history of sales success, then at multiple organizations, they haven't been at IBM for 18 years, right? So that guy's a walking time bomb. For the person who's worked at 3 or 4 companies in their 15-year career, and in every case has consistently hit numbers, knows what to do, understands what pipeline needs to look like, figured out how to sell in a different industry or a different company, that previous history, they will be able to come and sell, assuming your product or service has any merit. That's our experience. Now, the question is, when you find that person, can you afford them?
Yeah. Well, maybe one of those situations, if you're in a position where it's like, can you afford not to? pay for them if they're that good. Because I think there's the combination there is like they need to be able to sell themselves, but and that's an amazing predictor, but not the only predictor. The other one there is going to be now it's like let me use what I would call competency-based interview questions and a proper methodology around interviews to actually unpack what is the demonstrated past behavior of success that you've been able to sell other things, specifically and especially something similar to us.
But Cameron, how is that different to any other role, right? So if you've got an implementation consultant, how is it any way different? That if you work on the basis that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, then that's true. And then the only thing that comes down is, are you asking the right questions in the interview to elicit the past behavior and get the answer? And that's what the top grading process does. It gets it out of them, and it gives you a framework to do the references to confirm what they said was true.
Awesome.
It's
So
amazing
if
to
I
me
was curious about that,
Mm.
top grading is just something I just type into Google top grading and
Just
it'll give
type
me
top
that.
grading recruitment process, and it'll tell you exactly how that thing works. 100%. And it's
Awesome.
incredible how many times. So if somebody says, you know what, I like this, but I was really bad at ABCD, and you call their manager and says, you know what, he was really bad at ABCD. You've got a guy in front of you who's telling you, don't hire me for ABCD because I'm not good at it. And by the way, I'm honest about what I'm not good at. I mean, what more could you ask for? You're not going to get the perfect person. If they tell you they're great at it, and then they go and say, no, that was not his or her forte, then that's where you have your biggest challenge. So yeah, that's a general recruiting item, not just for sales. It's kind of across the board. The other thing, of course, is how much you offer salespeople. Are you willing to lose your money in your first year? Now, of course, in certain business types, this doesn't work. But if you are in an annuity revenue, be ready to pay sales commissions and salaries greater than the revenue of your first year from your customer. And nobody in our business model makes money in year one on that customer, right? That's a loss leader. 2, 3, 4, 5, that's when you really make your money. And Netflix, I think they quote that it costs about 1.09 times year one revenue to acquire a customer. But then how long are you generally a customer for? So salespeople, that commissions are, they're big. It also took me quite a mindset change. So I mentioned that we have this role in the middle called sales development, where we pay for an accepted opportunity. So in other words, where the salesperson says, yes, there's an opportunity, we then pay out extra cash for that. That was tough for me to wrap around my head around, because I'm always used to the fact somebody closes a deal, I pay them a percentage of the deal, and that's my variable cost structure. And I had to be persuaded, and luckily I was, that actually that person's done their job. You don't want them caring about whether the deal closes. Their job was to identify the opportunity, right? And you have to trust in the rest of the process to do that. And so that was a big learning for me as well. But sales, it costs you a huge amount to generate your most important metric.
And I think it's, to your point, breaking those down individually. Okay, on the so topics here of building out a sales function, finding and hiring, cultivating rainmakers. Anything else that you want to, that you're itching to drop that we haven't spoken about?
So I think the only other thing, and I repeat this simply because a number of people have said to me afterwards that really profoundly hit them, is if you think your business isn't a sales business, then I really question what business you're in, because every business is a sales business, first, second, and third. The first two lines in anything should be, how many customers did we win? And how many customers did we either keep if you're in the annuity model, or how many repeat customers? They bought product A and then they bought product B, right? That's the most important thing an organization does. Everything else is operational execution, right? Which you can get some very anal, very competent people to kind of execute for you. And if you don't see your business that way, because perhaps you didn't have a sales background and sales is below you and you're a consulting business, and we don't sell our stuff, people come to us because of our reputation, then I really would question the longevity of that mindset. Every business is a sales business.
Well, I could just end the episode there. That was awesome. Phil, okay, so let's evolve now into the next topic around the second business, right? So I mean, you obviously had SurTech, then you got Konsise involved as well. Well, you got Konsise involved. You started Konsise too, right? So now you've already got from what my understanding, what we spoke about offline, is you've already developed this market, these relationships, these distribution channels, and you've noticed that there's a lot of these gaps within businesses besides governance, but also on the kind of taxation side, that's a big pain point. And so you've already got these customer relationships. You're already targeting similar organizations, just different people. And yeah, talk to me about really how Konsise came into the fold.
Sure. So thank you. So Konsise was an iterative process. At no point was there a light bulb idea. In the main business, it effectively had an analytics underpin. And in those analytics, we were doing analytics in the context of VAT to look for certain anomalies. And then what that big business did is they changed the way that their business model was. And so we couldn't do it in their software anymore. So we were forced, for those customers we'd won, to go and build a little tool that allowed them to do it outside of that main software. And then those customers said, yeah, but this is really cool, but couldn't you do it for these other things as well? And then we said, yes, we could. And then they said, well, now you've got all these analytics, there's nowhere to put it. Couldn't you build us a workflow tool to house all this stuff? So we built a workflow tool. Then we started showing this workflow tool, and everyone said, I love this workflow tool. Why would I pay for analytics? Then I walked into a woman at Afgri. I'll call her, her name's Emma Ensha. And she ripped me apart. And she said, your product is awful. It has to be able to do these 8 things. And I thought, this is a great product spec, right? Except done by a senior tax person. I'll circle around to this. After 2 years, I called her and I said, do you remember in that meeting room you told me that I need to go build these products? She said, yeah. I said, I have built it. It's ready. And she said, show it. Of course, she bought it straight away and is one of our biggest evangelists. She had no idea that we were building on her spec. Anyway, so it was highly iterative. The number of people at the beginning who said, basically, so it's just SharePoint. Basically SharePoint on steroids. And then we had to iterate and iterate and iterate. And so that's where it came about. At no point was it a light bulb moment. It was showing something to a customer who said, but if it just had this. And by the way, Cameron, we still have customers who say to us, oh, but if it just had this. Now, luckily, we have the cash flow of existing customers and we can now build on that. That was when we had very little to be able to do. And so that's where Konsise came from. But because my background is sales, what I do know how to do is pick up the phone to everyone that matters in a systematic way and present our software. And if they're not buying it now, the question is only when, not if, and walk away with a list of specifications that they need in order to buy it. Nobody says, no, God, I would never use this. They only say, it needs to do A, B, C, and D. And so guess what's on our roadmap, right? A, B, C, and D. So it's only a question of when they'll become a customer. And so that's how Konsise came about. Now, I was also incredibly lucky. So 2 lucky things here. The first one is that, of course, this is being funded by the bigger business. And so I would not have the bravery, I think, to put in the millions that I do if that other business wasn't churning it out many times that in order to cover it. And the second thing was I was very lucky to hire effectively CIO, who's just such a good all-rounder and good person that he can effectively run the culture of the business, which is really important to us, while I focus exclusively on the sales and, of course, still running the kind of the bigger business to be able to do. So those are 2 really important things. And so that's how it came about. Now, we serve 2 markets, and there's an interesting lesson in this. So we serve a market which is enterprise, so Netbank, ABSA, Old Mutual, Santam, those kind of customers, as well as the average mum and pop accounting firm. Now, surprisingly, the mum and pop accounting firm who are scared to pay you 3,000 rand a month because it comes out of their own pocket are very needy and very difficult to work with in many respects. But once you've got them, they'll be very loyal. But these big corporates will spend 10 times the value and they won't blink twice. It's not out of their pocket and they are much less needy. And so certainly starting from the top down, a lot of people say don't. A lot of people say, guys, start with your smallest client, because once you're hooked into your biggest client, right, you'll never be able to kind of work your way down the market. So in our particular case, we started with big customers. They taught us a lot. It should have this feature and that feature and so on. It gave us great cash flow. And of course, then we could build for the smaller market, which is slightly more difficult, but very broad. So there's only, as you've mentioned, 150, 200 companies who might buy on an enterprise. There are thousands of small accounting firms who would use our software, right? And there's no reason that we can't capture that entire market. And just like you pay for the movies half price if you go on a Tuesday lunchtime for the same thing, we differentiate the market from a price perspective according to that affordability as well. And so we're just incredibly lucky that we happenstance across this opportunity.
Well, you use the word lucky, but the fact that it took you 2 years to build those 8 features from Immature, and you worked so hard at this, you very much created your own luck.
So you're very kind to say that, but if it starts anywhere, it starts with taking something to market that's awful and going and getting some feedback. Because if you don't do that step, you've got nowhere to go to. So for any young budding entrepreneurs, right, starting with something really bad, take it to market, and somebody will give you some extremely valuable feedback for that. And I think that's the lucky part. The people we came across along the way who said it would be great if you could do this.
Talk to me about you and the relationship with your CIO, because now you've got not just 2 business units, you've got 2 businesses that you've shared responsibility. You've obviously you've got a well-oiled sales function that you are leading on the one side. What's life like for the 2 of you now in your business? How hectic are your calendars? How hectic are your lives?
It's a good question. At the moment, enormously. So the comparison of the 2 businesses, the most senior people in the first business, which is distribution business, is of course salespeople, right? Because that's what it is. It's a sales business. In this business, 80% of our employees are technical. They're developers, right? They're building our product. And so they all fit under that CIO function. Now, in fact, he moved down to Cape Town and so kind of developed a remote culture. And I think the answer is that we're just incredibly closely aligned in and around our cultural beliefs, what a company should do, and what we should do for our people and what they should do for us. Sure, we're incredibly busy, and we're kind of maxing out in terms of our current structures. In other words, I think he's got about 25 to 28 people reporting into him, which is just impossible to do and keep on top of. And as a result, he's not getting to some of the stuff he wants to be able to do. I'm very glad those people don't in any way report to me, right? Because then I wouldn't have time to deal with sales, right? And that's where I spend my time dealing with that sales function. So it works incredibly well. And, there's an argument in bigger businesses, you decide your structure and then people fit into it. I think in a smaller business, that's not always the case at all, right? You choose your people, which might be the 2 founders or the 1 founder. And based on that personality of that person, that's how a business will grow. Structures can always come later for that. So yeah, our diaries are pretty busy, but very well structured. We work in scrums and teams. So for example, my sales team at 8:00 every morning, we sit down and we talk about yesterday. They come with a presentation, which is a shared presentation they have to put into it before 8 a.m. We talk about how many contacts were added to the system yesterday. We look at every single one of them that was discovered. We make sure their spelling is correct, their email address, have we spoken to before? Because they're when they get that email address, can you imagine if Cameron was spelt with a small c and a big M, right? You'd think these guys are incompetent. We then talk about what are the demos that we had yesterday, right? How did it go? What's the next step? We talk about the demos that are booked today, what needs to happen, right? We talk about our pipeline, what stage everything is at, and we do that every single day. And we manage this thing incredibly closely. And because of that, I don't actually need to have a conversation with them after 8:30 every morning. We cover it all. Any questions you've got? Who's got something outstanding? Who's waiting for me on something? Cool, let's do that now. And then they can get on with their day and I can get on with my busy day. And that works very well for us. And he does likewise in the development team, I think in multiple contexts. That's fundamentally kind of the agile approach to running a business.
So what would you say your current kind of obstacles are right now to growth, or at least freeing your time up?
It's funny you said it because I'm more behind now than I've ever been, and this long weekend exacerbated that. Well, generically, me, right? The inability to delegate certain things that I want to keep control of, just as an entrepreneur. So, for example, every contract that gets sent out, employment contract, I just has to go through me. I don't know why. I feel as an entrepreneur, that's a big spend, right? Even a small employee is $250,000 a year. A senior person, more than $1 million. Can you imagine getting something wrong on an employment contract? So I'm a bit of a control freak in that respect. I think early on that's a very good thing. Later on it's a bad thing. I'm not sure where we are. Hindsight will tell me if this is the good thing or the bad thing stage. And so I tell you what, when it works well, and I recognize that it works well. Sometimes I get to the point where like, I can't deal with this, guys. We're going to have a meeting and we're going to do it once a week or once a month. These are the topics we're going to cover. You're going to prepare for this meeting because it's your stuff. And you're going to bring everything. I don't need to prepare, right? In that meeting, we measure what matters because it's the most important thing. And I don't care if it took forever to put together. You've got people to delegate that to. And you bring that, we talk about it, and we leave and we have our next set of action plans. And what's frustrating for me is it takes me to a point of almost bursting before I realize, hold on, I need to do that with this next thing. And people respond very well to that because they like that level of responsibility, right? People are very capable.
Can you give me an example?
So in the context of demonstrations, so we sell a variety of products, and where we distribute products, they want us to sell a broad suite. So in other words, it doesn't matter if we hit our target in one product, they will say, well, hold on, you didn't sell product B, C, and D as well. And so, this was quite blind to me till I eventually gave somebody a target and said, guys, I want to know every day by person who is booking meetings for certain products, because you can only demonstrate what's being booked, right? So it's not the demo person's problem, it's the people booking the demo's problem. I wanted to see exactly by person per week what products they are setting up demonstrations for. And I was going through Salesforce myself and measuring this stuff. I gave it to somebody, and once a week it comes back and there's a lovely chart. This person booked these demos for product A, product B, product C, product D. And you can see, guys, why are they not putting product D? We can see exactly where our problem is when you put it on a chart. There's a great book called Measure What Matters. I haven't read the book. I've read the front page and I understood it. I still don't know who's read the book, because measure what matters. It just makes sense, doesn't it? To be able to do. So certainly my personality is a bit of a control freak. I would argue any entrepreneur has that in them. Certainly at over 200 million rand a year, I should let go of a lot of things. But I still keep hold of those. And so I think I'm my biggest constraint. Now, you were introduced to me by a guy called Rich Mulholland, and Rich is great at this. He delegates everything and creates systems to be able to support it, right? And keeps it up to date. And guess what? He gets from A to B, and it works. I think my own control freak nature prevents me from doing that, and actually has a negative impact on my own life. I probably would be a happier person and more time in my life if I didn't do that. Would I be in the same position? I don't know the answer to that. So, yeah, you're asking a question about time management from somebody who's not particularly good at it at the moment.
I resonate a lot with what you're saying, and I think the nature of being someone with impeccably high standards means that it becomes increasingly difficult to be able to let go, is because even with training, upskilling someone to be able to handle this, there's a certain level of peace of mind one can only have by knowing that there's a certain standard that it's being done and being cared for, regardless of the execution. And I think that's the hardest part to replace.
Yeah, so I'm building our own product. One of the things we have, and we've copied this from Facebook, is that done is better than perfect. So whatever it is you've shipped, it's gone. The first iPhone was horrendous, but it was better than none. And so done is better than perfect, and there's always a next day to doing stuff. And so increasingly, I'm learning that in certain contexts, but in others, especially stuff that has long-term impacts, things like contracts. There's things you just can't negotiate on, or you can't. I feel are too important to flip on. For those things as well. But the things I probably are a little bit anal about, other people don't care about, and it never comes to bite them.
Phil, I want to change gears now. I think it's still relevant to the topic of sales, but it's selling something different now. But now I was thinking about business exitability, right? It's another thing that we spoke about offline is, when thinking about exiting, looking at your two businesses, and actually, I'm going to say this is a rhetorical question, but I still want to know the answer. That's not a rhetorical question. Keep that in, Luke. That's silly. So So now what I want to know is basically the holding structure of SurTech and Konsise, right? They're exitable for different reasons or have different levels of exitability. One, this topic of why you're thinking this about this in the first place. But two, then let's get into the how exitable each one is.
Sure. I mean, if we start with the topic of exit, everybody talks about this as if building the business was exit was the only reason you started the business in the first place. And I don't know that that's true. I don't know that it's not. I mean, some businesses, especially the private equity type businesses and VCs, are built and they're loss makers from the start. And the only way you're ever going to make money is with some liquidity event to be able to do and to achieve. And so I was very lucky as part of my business school. We went to Israel, which they call themselves the startup nation. And we went to Tel Aviv University. And within that, they have a whole startup business inside the university. And all they do is, like I say, all they do, of course, they learn a lot. But the amount of stuff they're building purely to sell, they're never going to make money. It either goes on the scrap heap as code or somebody comes and buy it for billions of dollars. So anyway, so again, I didn't build for a specific exit. I wanted to be an independent. I wanted to be able to be my own boss. Although once one has an asset, you're sitting there. So for example, and I'm not doing this, so let's assume I'm making 100 million a year, right? Theoretically, my business has a PE value of kind of anywhere between 3 and 7 times, so 300 to 700 million. Now, could I achieve that over the time period just by managing it? Could I then, could I get that now and deploy it into the markets and make money out of that? These are the questions that one ends up asking, I think, only because other people come to you and ask the question, like, what's your exit plan? And sometimes you say, well, did I need an exit plan? I wasn't sure. I didn't get in it for an exit plan. Now, when you're building a software business, typically they get bought because they get amalgamated into something else. So one of the great lessons when I sold to EOH and I was doing the SAP consulting, EOH came to me and said, we really love your business. We'd love to buy you. But by the way, if you don't sell to us at the price we tell you, we are going to compete you out of the market. And they were right. And I think that's true for many small software companies as well. So inevitably one has to do that. And of course, it takes enormous money to scale for that as well. So, but when you have a business like a distribution business, which inherently has this enormous risk of termination, it has a very low resale value. And a good example was this is my business partner recently exited his business, and we were sitting talking to the guy who was his agent in the sale, and he achieved a lot more than they were actually hoping for. And I gave him all the fundamentals of our business, and he said, "This is amazing. Yes, absolutely." And then I mentioned that oh, by the way, the contract ends in 3 years. And he said, "I can't sell your business. It's unsellable. Like, I literally cannot sell your business." Then I showed him the Konsise business at a fraction. He said, "Oh, I can sell that business. Like, come to me in 2 years and I can tell you how much that's worth." And he gave me a very big number. And because the point was that you were selling the intellectual property, right, in terms of doing that, as opposed to just the cash generative business. And so, Cameron, while we spoke earlier around the low risk of a international company wanting to come into South Africa, it's still a risk, and a risk some organizations wouldn't be prepared to take. And so inherently, that's my challenge around exit, even if it was what I wanted, which I'm not completely convinced. Of course, everything's for sale at a certain price, and I think we can all agree that.
Well, I think one of the best ways I've heard it framed in terms of selling and buying a business is the value of it is simply what is the opportunity cost of me doing this myself, right? And I think to your points around SurTech in terms of the distribution-based model, as you're saying, there's the contracts coming up for renewal in 3 years, is what's preventing someone else from waiting 3 years to renew that contract. And this is not me, for the record, inviting competitors, but we're talking about the genuine sellability of this business. Is that for me to buy the business as it is, unless there's some sale-based IP, which is some of the most valuable IP you can ever really have for a business, what is it that I'm actually going to be buying that as an opportunity cost that's can't be built myself? And I think that's the question and answer in itself. And so maybe it's the point of thinking this out loud is there's a general principle of a distribution-based business model. It's an amazing business model for cash flow, but for significant exits, not quite.
100%. And I recently renegotiated the contract, and there was a new lawyer on their side that went through this. And at the end, we signed it, and he said, "Tell me why you do this. Why do you put so much commitment into this? I don't understand." Because he's looking at it from an international perspective. And I'm saying, because it creates great money, right? It's a good cash business. And if it terminates after that, then it terminates, right? We still have this big sales engine, and there's no way that somebody else doesn't want the big sales engine. It's just no way that somebody doesn't want that. So it does have inherent value. It's just very hard to see it now. The one thing I would say to listeners, Cameron, is that, as I mentioned, I'm doing a UK law degree, and my current module is intellectual property. I have to tell you, this is an absolute eye-opener for me, is that the true value in the world is property. Now, of course, there's obvious property in terms of houses and land and so on, but intellectual property in terms of whether it's a song or a poem or a movie or software code or databases is truly valuable. Having seen my business partner for a similar sized business exit on huge amounts of money because they owned the intellectual property, it's only just come home to roost. And maybe you're looking there thinking, wasn't this obvious 10 years ago? And the answer is actually no, it really wasn't. And that to anyone who's considering where do they invest their money, do they build a distribution business otherwise, and they've got, they're starting from zero, build intellectual property, because intellectual property gives you value and power at exit. If you're in a distribution business, the people who made us an offer basically includes me for 3 years, right? To which, well, I may as well own the business for 3 years because I'll make the same money and do the same thing. Whereas my partner who sold the intellectual property, they don't need him. They got the value. It's the intellectual property. They don't need him to do that. So your future freedoms and the reasons you got into this thing can be not just the value, is actually linked to the nature of what you're selling. And I think immature business people like me, which is I was when I got in, thought I was selling profitability. And now, having read this and understood it in more detail, I realize I'm not selling profitability at all. I'm selling future profitability, and future profitability is inherently linked to intellectual property. And that was not obvious to me at all.
I'm maybe putting some pieces together, but you said significantly earlier that consulting isn't a business. Is this part of why you think so?
I did facetiously say that. No, I've been saying that for a long time. I think because I had a consulting business. So the consulting business is the inherent challenge is, if you really scale it, Anderson, KPMG, PwC, of course, you have a moat around your business because nobody can compete. But if you're a 10-man consulting business, your entire value is your people that you're selling the time of, even if it's in their contract, and they can walk out the door on 1 or 2 months' notice. And in a country like South Africa, you can legally withdraw your labor anytime you want. You just won't get paid anymore. So you have almost no value. There was quite a big business in South Africa that I can't name when I first moved here that was going into liquidation. And I went to a bank to try and get some money to buy it. And the reason they wouldn't lend the money is that 50% of the revenue came from consulting, and the consultants could leave spread out of the bat. So there was no future nothing to protect their loan value against. And so, of course, it's a real business, and you sell consulting, and I'm facetious when I say that, and I genuinely shouldn't. And I apologize to all consultants in the world. But I've come across.
Look, I'm not offended. I'm the first person to acknowledge that it is the worst business model.
Some of your listeners might be. It is. So think of lawyers. Like all the lawyers I deal with, they say, guys, it's the worst business model ever. If I don't work next week, I get paid nothing. And so I see all the time these consultants, and I've dealt with these firms, and it's guys. You can see their website. We are ex-PwC consultants who did this, and I think, well, that's your ending point, right? Because that's not your strength at all. That's your weakness. And you go in, and fundamentally, they've got some kind of software, but it's all driven by them and their inherent intellectual property. And I deal with the Big Four a lot in the tax business, and the only thing they care about is man hours and timesheets. And in many respects, they can't build IP in their businesses because they would have to take somebody whose job is to build timesheets and make them unbillable. And that, for most consulting firms, is a very, very difficult thing to be able to do. Despite the fact that they're the ones who've been espousing for decades around how you have to move to annuity revenue. Again, if you're the person who consults on how to put out fires on oil rig refineries, right, when they come up, I'm sure you're going to get an absolute fortune and you've got a niche. But most people aren't lucky enough to have such a niche. to do such a thing. And so it is a very difficult business model to sustain. Every month you start again from absolute scratch, right? And you know that better than anyone.
100% agree. Cool. So Phil, I think what I want to know on the topic of exitability is, where are you at in your head right now around exiting these businesses? It seems like it's your business partner exited, and so it's like, might as well have the conversation, see what we're in for. Oh wow, this is eye-opening.
And of course, it's very intriguing. Somebody gives you big numbers, and you think, "Wow, that's more than I ever thought I was going to have." But the answer is, the Konsise business is just growing, and it's incredibly fun to build your own product and think, "Oh, I can add this, and I can add this feature, and we can do a webinar, and people can." Like, I cannot explain the creative juices it gets flowing, and just the pleasure of doing that. And so that, I think that's got a long way before A, it's profitable, and B, it would actually be saleable in any event. But I think inevitably that is a business that has to be sold, because I think software companies have to be sold in the main, unless you're going to be Microsoft. But then the SurTech business is, it wouldn't make any sense. It provides an incredibly good lifestyle, and as a distribution business, it's most valuable when you've just renewed it, and you renewed the contract to distribute. And at that point, you're worth, let's say, 3 or 4 years worth of EBITDA. But if you just hold it for 3 or 4 years, you would have got it anyway, and you still own the asset. So unless somebody's going to pay you a significant multiple, it doesn't make sense. And it talks to your previous point about the limited valuation of distribution businesses. And so no, I'll have to continue working for a while. And as a South African, my kids go to UK universities, and that's so damn expensive that I have to keep working just to fund their lifestyles.
Well, look, I think no one needs to be convinced of the value and importance of an exit in a business. But I really think that the unsung hero is the cash cow of a business that allows for freedom of time as an entrepreneur. I think that's a lot harder to achieve than the exit of a business. But if you can achieve that, right, isn't that an amazing situation deal to be able to have, where you can basically sit as chairman of your business, you can be on the board, you can have some free time, you can still guide the vision, but really do what you want with it, and it's this still profitable business.
Yes, if you can delegate. So which the person who built the business probably did it with very tight reins. And so they would be scared that the devaluation of the business would happen in that respect. Yeah, it's a very difficult topic to kind of know, because there's a really good book called Buy Then Build, and the argument is that entrepreneurs spend 5 years toiling and troubling to get a business where it just makes a small amount of money. They think it's worth a lot. You go and buy, you give them a little bit of a premium to what it's actually worth. They sell the business, but they've done all that hard work, and you're now building on a reasonable base. So let's assume you grow 20% a year. You're doing it on a reasonable base, and you didn't have to go through that 5 years of growing at almost nothing. Now, when you've got a business that's a decent size like mine, and you're growing at 20% a year, 20% of this number is actually a ton, right? And the idea of starting again and thinking, "Oh, I could grow a business at 50% of the year," but it's off at such a low base. And I think the unsung hero is the person who just stays. And the business might have grown fivefold in the last 5 years, and increase wealth significantly, but another fivefold wouldn't be wealth. I mean, it would be extreme wealth. And if you can keep course for that, I think that would be a truly successful result.
And so what does the future now hold for Phillip Tillman, for SurTech Konsise? Maybe let's just say near future. Let's say 12 to 18 months.
So 12 to 18 months. So for us, it's we focus on 3 things. So the first one is acquiring new customers. We love acquiring new customers. It's our heartbeat, and we just keep doing it. And I can't get enough of it. Every month we acquire new customers. It's just great. The second one is having great retention ratios. In other words, we fight really hard that customers never leave us. So they call that the leaky bucket in subscription, right? You don't want to leak out as much as you're putting in, and we do that. And if we do that, the only 2 things we have to look after, and it trickles down to the profitability, right? So and comes in, and I think that's really the goal. It sounds so it's not driven around the profitability. It's really about growing that top line and enjoying it. If I may say, so the other consideration is whether or not in 18 months when our lease comes up, whether we actually go fully remote. I mean, I'm not sure if you're a fully remote business, but we were started long before COVID came around and had the mandatory change. And can we take the business model and the sales model that we're talking about and make it a fully remote business? I know people can start businesses now that are remote by design, but it's it's not very hard, but it's going to be harder to do it otherwise. But personally, I would
Why?
love a year in Cyprus. So I think it just is. So the level of the person that we hired requires a level of management. Certainly those junior people I talked about in the sales team to be able to do that. We built in South Africa. We've built geographically in approximately a common area, right? Which was completely unnecessary in hindsight. And so some people will leave because they really love the office culture and they want to be part of an office. There's just a lot of variability compared to the organization who from day one said, we're remote. This is how we work. This is how we kit you out. Now, from a shareholder perspective, the amount of money I wouldn't have to pay in rent would be insane. I mean, it would add 30%, 30% to our profitability straight away. So there's a lot of economic reasons to do it. But, I really love the idea. So this year, it's been a personal goal of mine to go since I was 18 and follow the British and Irish Lions. They're doing Australia this year. And so I'm going to spend a month working remotely from Australia. I would love every year to go and do possibly even a year in Cyprus, which is on the same time zone. And the ability to perhaps have a better work location balance, maybe not the work-life balance, but just do it in different places, I think would be really exciting and possibly would elongate my desire to stay in the particular business if I was getting a variety of other areas. And I could go and do this from different places. I'm not sure if you're a skier, but I really want to do a season in a snow resort. I do 3 or 4 months, and these old bones won't be able to snowboard for much longer.
What's preventing you from doing that now?
Just too much control. So I built a business where leadership is an in-person event and it requires presence. Culturally, systematically, it requires that. And it will need a very deliberate effort to adjust it, which may or may not be the big effort that I've just mentioned. I don't know, but it will be an effort to do, and if only a psychological change, which is often the biggest fear, to be able to do it. And so that's it, which is why I'm doing a month at a time, and I'm seeing how that's going to go. And for clarity, I work like hell from these places. I maintain the work ethic. I just love to do it in different places, right? You get to go and see, your evenings are very different. So having kids leaving home, having left home an empty nest, there's no reason for us to stay in one place just for work.
Phil, thank you for being on the Founder Files. This has been an awesome conversation. I hope to see you succeed at this, knowing as an entrepreneur who's not immune to hard work, knows exactly what it's like to be able to achieve some kind of monumental effort. But I hope you manage to get those skiing holidays that you, whilst you actually, not even a holiday, you're being able to run the business remotely. To finish off, what's the one question that I haven't asked you, that I should have asked you, that you'd like to answer now?
I am not sure, but the one anecdote I would probably give as a last thing is in a little bit of maturity, I've realized that I'm always wrong. I'm never right about anything. Whatever I was scared of, it was either much worse than I thought or not at all, but never exactly what I thought. And whatever I thought I was going to succeed, I either tanked or did much, much better. And so the anxiety that I would give myself as an entrepreneur and other entrepreneurs, I would grossly encourage people to let that go, because whatever you're anxious about, it could be way worse or way better. But the thing specific you're worried about is not going to happen the way you are, because you can't see the future. And I now take that and I have a much more relaxed view on the stuff that I do, realizing that actually it's the externalities that create most of the swings of good or bad, not the stuff I did. And nobody can control that. So you can give yourself a much better, peaceful journey of entrepreneurship if you don't hang on to being right.
Another one of those mic drop moments, Phil. Love the fact that we're ending off like that. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. It's been really insightful. Looking forward to re-listening to this episode myself.
Thanks, Cameron.
So Phil, like many founders, is in this an exciting but tough space of seeing this possibility of being able to have this time and location freedom, being able to work wherever he wants to, but also this challenge of control, of being able to make sure that I'm running the business like I want it run. And this is a very difficult place to be because it feels, one, super close to what your goals are, but you still are very tied in, and the scale of your business is very dependent on you. And, if you didn't know this by now, this is a problem that we directly solve at Metabolic. So if you are suffering from that problem and you want to help with making it easier to delegate and making sure that you can take this skiing holiday or go away to Cyprus, I can help you do that, right? Might sound like I'm selling you magic beans, but trust me, it works. We've done this with over 100 different clients across 15 plus countries. And I can tell you now with confidence that we can help you get to a point where your business can scale without depending on you for everything. If you want to figure out how we go about doing that, please follow the link in the description below. Let's have a conversation and let's explore specifically what your business and situation is and what you need. But until then, can't wait for that conversation. Thank you for listening to another full episode of the Founder Files. I'll see you next time. Cheers for now.